Hi everyone, I'm Miriam Ben Salah. I'm a curator and I'm the director of the Renaissance Society in Chicago. I'm here today in the exhibition of Alex Sayed titled Roaring Forties at Gallery Balice in Hertling on Rue Saint-Martin in Paris. I want to talk a little bit about the exhibition, but as an introduction, I would love to tell a little bit more about how I met Alex, because I think it's relevant to his practice in general and to the way he builds his exhibitions. Alex and I met 3 or 4 years ago in Tunis. He had just gotten back from the desert, actually, where he had traveled by himself in his car. Actually not exactly by himself, because he had 2 chameleons with him, Camel and Leon, that sort of were his companions throughout the trip. Alex went to the desert to collect objects and elements like sand, or more sort of sculptural things like a gas container that he got in Qsar Ghilal and that ended up in a show of his in Paris at Balice in Hertling. His career as an artist is doubled by a kind of career as a smuggler, where he likes to displace objects from point A to point B. And objects in Alex's practice are always a pretext for something. They're a pretext for an encounter or a movement or for a narrative. They usually hold a narrative and sort of develop it through space and time. And where he starts from and where he ends is kind of his art, actually, more than anything that you can see on the walls. The exhibition Roaring Forties is not about the moment that we're living, which is a moment of global pandemic and sort of international lockdown and actually local lockdown, but it is born out of this moment nonetheless. And for someone whose whole practice is based upon movement and traffic being hauled into one place is quite significant in terms of what it produces. I think during the first confinement in Paris, Alex started sort of questioning his ideas around moving around, going from one place to another. And when he realized that all the paths were kind of blocked, he couldn't take his car anymore, he couldn't fly, he couldn't really even go into the street, he started looking onto the sea. And reading books about navigating and about marines and boats. The title Roaring Forties is a reference to these very strong winds that blow in the southern hemisphere. And they are at the same time an indication of chaos and complexity and stability, but they also help pushing the boats go faster in a way. And it's an interesting metaphor or analogy to what we're living here, or at least to the way Alex perceived it, as this completely chaotic time, but that kind of pushes us, or pushes his practice at least, towards something else, maybe more quickly than he would have thought. We used to be taking for granted that movement and displacement were sort of part of the way that art practitioners circulate and disseminate their work into the world. Here, it seems like the exhibition is uprooted into that idea of displacement, but it's also completely embedded in the shortcomings of the period of momentary immobilization that we're in. In a similar way, something happened to Alex's practice after the revolution in Tunisia in 2011, where he found himself sort of surrounded by this overproduction of images. Everyone was saturated by images from the revolution circulating everywhere. And at the time, he was doing a lot of photography. And that's when he started looking towards the desert and towards sort of more virgin territory in a way, and his practice shifted at that point. And I feel like there's the same thing right now where we found ourselves at a kind of crossroads between two moments, and it forced him to look somewhere else. And where he decided to look is towards the sea. And so Alex started reading all of these navigation books, and he actually went and visited someone who were fabricating boats. The way Alex's practice works is that he usually sets up a mission for himself, kind of a fantasy, something that he wants to do, but then he doesn't control the outcome. So the mission right now was take the sea and go navigate. And for that, he decided that he could build a boat, for example. So he started researching how to build a boat. And through the different encounters, especially the conversation he had with people actually building boats, Alex started being interested in sails for their simplicity and for their beauty. But he also realized that he couldn't just exhibit them as such. And at the same time, they were already so beautiful that they didn't really need any modification. So they became these canvases, because they actually are canvases, and they are marked by the adventures that sort of shaped them, so you can see some traces on them. And it's interesting that by entering the gallery, you're under the impression you're looking at an abstract painting exhibition, and I think there is a little bit of humor in that as well, which is, I think there's an opposition in Alex's work between the sort of mundane quality of the objects that he brings into the exhibition space, like the sails, and the sort of context in which they're exhibited that kind of elevates them to the status of artwork. So there is a little wink, a little clin d'oeil from the artist, I think, to also this environment of an art space into the production that we're doing right now. And it also comes out of questioning the ways in which we produce. Like, does it make sense right now to ship artworks, to build big exhibitions, to go into complex projects when everything is sort of on hold? For example, there is a reference that Alex convokes for this exhibition. It's futurist sci-fi writer Buckminster Fuller, and Alex takes science fiction as a sort of generator of images that actually get realized later. For him, every image that we produce sort of enters the human psyche and becomes reality at some point. And so for him, convoking all these objects and making them into a new environment here in the gallery will probably convoke a future that is him realizing the fantasy of building a boat and going into the sea. I'm saying fantasy very on purpose because Alex usually sets very impossible missions to himself, and what's more important is sort of the journey in order to realize them rather than the realization. Very often the outcome of these missions is failure and there is no real realization, but everything in between is what composes his practice. So again, even mentally, even in the way he built his art, he is in movement. Even though he's in one place, he's still in flux between a certain reality and a fantasy, and whatever happens in between is the exhibition, actually.